Sometimes, a woman reaches a moment in her life when the noise around her simply becomes too heavy to carry any longer. The constant demands, the unspoken expectations, the silent burden of always being needed. These things can weigh on the heart like 1,000 small stones, and over the years she learns to smile through it, to keep her hands busy, to never let the world see her weariness. But behind every quiet nod and every patient gesture, there lives a secret longing, the desire to be free without explanation, to be seen without having to prove anything at all. There is a tender kind of strength in choosing to lay those burdens down, even for a moment, to step back from the endless doing and simply allow yourself to breathe, to exist, to remember the part of you that has nothing to prove. In that stillness, something ancient awakens, a knowing that your worth was never meant to be measured by how much you give or how little you ask for yourself. This is where the true power of silence begins. Not the silence of defeat or resignation, but the silence of a woman who has finally returned to her own heart. A woman who no longer rushes to fill the spaces with explanations or apologies. As you listen, perhaps you will feel the stirrings of that quiet strength within you. Let us walk together now into the stories and reflections that remind us everything begins to fall into place the moment you choose to honor your own presence. Part 1. The power of silence. There is a kind of silence that is not emptiness, but a presence so profound it seems to hold the whole sky within it. Today, I'd like to invite you to sit beside me and listen to a story passed down through the quiet corridors of Buddhist monasteries, one that whispers to us that true strength often wears no armor at all. Long ago, in a small temple nestled against the gentle slopes of a green mountain, there lived an elderly nun named Samadhi. Her name itself meant deep concentration, and her presence was said to be like a calm lake that reflected everything clearly. Villagers would come to her when their hearts were restless, convinced she must have the perfect words to soothe their troubles. But Samadhi rarely offered words. Instead, she would sit with them in unbroken stillness, her eyes resting softly on the flickering candle between them. Some left frustrated, expecting advice. Yet, many returned later to say that in her silence, they felt more understood than they ever had, by 1,000 explanations. One day, a young woman, weary from the chaos of her household, came to the temple. She poured out her story, the shouting of her grown children, the bitterness of a marriage turned cold, the unending labor that no one seemed to see. When her voice finally fell away into tears, she asked, "Revered one, why do you not say anything? Can you not tell me what I should do to make them care?" Samadhi smiled, so gently it was almost a sigh, and she reached for the woman's hand. She whispered only this: "When the pond is stirred, no reflection is true. Sit until the water clears." And in that moment, the woman felt an unexpected softness bloom in her chest, like a small lantern of hope she didn't know she still carried. I wonder, have you ever noticed how quickly we reach for words when we feel unseen? We try to explain ourselves, to defend our worth, to correct misunderstandings, believing that if we just say the right thing, everything will change. But sometimes, as the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. And sometimes, that word is no word at all. In our culture, silence is so often mistaken for weakness, for passivity, yet true silence is neither. It is the quiet dignity of knowing you do not need to shout to be real. You do not need to argue to be valid. You are already enough, as you are, without performance or justification. In Samadhi's story, her silence was not an absence but a space, a compassionate, open field where the young woman's pain could finally breathe without judgment. That kind of silence can feel unsettling, because it leaves us alone with our own reflection. But over time, it becomes the most trustworthy companion. Like the still pond, it shows us exactly where we are, without distortion. So I ask you, in your own life, where might you be trying to fill every pause with explanations? Where could you, instead, choose to rest in the power of your quiet presence? What if the next time someone tried to pull you into an argument or demanded your reaction, you allowed yourself the gift of a sacred pause? Perhaps, in that very space, you might hear a wiser voice inside you, one that doesn't need to prove anything. As we move forward, let us carry this image of the pond clearing itself simply by being still. For in that stillness, a woman's strength becomes not just visible, it becomes unshakable. And this, dear friend, leads us naturally to the next truth: waiting in the quiet, the art of focusing on yourself without guilt or fear. Part 2. Focusing on yourself. There is a tender liberation that arrives when a woman finally chooses to turn her gaze inward, not out of bitterness, nor from resignation, but from a soft, unshakable knowing that her own spirit deserves her care. In the old Buddhist texts, there is a parable of a woman named Anaya, whose life was like a lantern always burning for others. From dawn to dusk, she poured herself into every need around her: her children's hunger, her husband's ambitions, her neighbor's sorrows. She became so skilled in tending everyone else's fires that she did not notice her own wick growing thin, the oil of her energy nearly gone. One evening, as the story goes, Anaya followed her teacher, a kindly monk with kind eyes and a voice like flowing water, up a steep hillside. They carried lanterns to guide them through the dark. Midway, her light began to flicker and die. In her panic, she turned to the monk and cried, "Master, please share your flame with me. I have no light left." But instead of relighting her lantern, he set his own down, cupped her trembling hands, and said softly, "Anaya, all these years you have borrowed your light from others. It is time to remember the flame that lives within you." And with that, he pressed her hands to her heart, reminding her that no external torch could ever sustain her as long as she neglected the quiet hearth inside. How many of us have lived this same story? We learn early, especially as women, that our worth is measured by how much we give, how tirelessly we serve, how quickly we say yes. We forget that attention is a currency, and if we spend it indiscriminately, there is nothing left for the deepest parts of us that long to be nourished. The Buddha once said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." Yet somehow, many women still feel uneasy when they withdraw that constant caretaking and offer themselves the devotion they so freely extend to everyone else. Focusing on yourself does not mean you abandon those you love. It means you anchor yourself so that you don't lose your footing in every storm. When Anaya finally sat alone in her dark room and placed her hand on her heart, she discovered a warmth rising from within, small at first, like the ember of a memory. With time, that ember grew into a steady flame. She no longer needed to beg for recognition or exhaust herself trying to fix what was never hers to heal. Her family still needed her, of course, but now she responded from a place of calm intention, not depletion. Her presence became more centered, and to her surprise, more respected. Perhaps you too have spent decades adjusting your steps to match the demands around you. Perhaps you've wondered who you might become if you stopped rushing to meet every expectation. I invite you to consider, what if your first responsibility each morning was not to answer every call, but to check on your own light? What if, before pouring from your cup, you made sure it was full enough to nourish your own spirit? This practice is not selfishness. It is remembering that your life matters, that your peace is sacred, that your joy is not a luxury to be postponed until everyone else is satisfied. In the same way Anaya learned to trust the flame in her heart, you too can learn to focus inward without apology. And in doing so, you may find that the very people you once worried about disappointing will be the ones most inspired by your example. As we journey forward together, let us hold this image of the inner lantern, steady, warm, unforced. For when you begin to cherish that light, you will discover an even deeper gift, the capacity to respond to life's challenges with a serenity that cannot be taken from you. This brings us to the next step in our path, the art of emotional sovereignty and the freedom it unfolds. Part 3. Emotional sovereignty. There is a quiet revolution that takes place the moment a woman decides her emotions will no longer be at the mercy of every passing wind. This is not about hardening the heart or building walls so tall that no one can enter. It is about cultivating a soft but steady place inside, like a garden tended with patience, where your feelings are acknowledged without being allowed to uproot your peace. In the Buddha's teachings, there is a story of Lady Visakha, a devoted disciple known for her generosity and grace. She was beloved by her community, but even so, she faced moments when others tried to provoke her, to stir her spirit into a storm of reaction. Once, during a great festival, a jealous neighbor approached her with cutting words, accusing her of selfish motives and false piety. Those gathered expected Visakha to defend herself, to argue or weep, but she simply lowered her gaze and took a single slow breath. When pressed to respond, she replied, "Just as the lotus rises pure from the mud, I do not carry your anger in my hands." Then she turned back to her offering with a tranquil smile, unmoved by the waves crashing around her. Have you ever noticed how quickly our nervous system wants to leap into defense when someone questions our worth? The tightening of the chest, the rush of heat to the face, the mind sprinting to prepare a counterattack. It is such a human impulse to believe that if we don't react, we will be diminished. But here is the paradox. The moment you stop allowing every criticism, every unpredictable mood, every disappointment to dictate your inner climate, you step into a power that can never be granted by anyone else. Emotional sovereignty is the birthright we often forget. It begins with a pause, the kind of pause that Lady Visakha practiced, the sacred instant between stimulus and response. Modern science calls this the shift from the amygdala, the seat of reactivity, to the prefrontal cortex, the home of wisdom and reflection. But long before we had these words, the Buddha simply taught, "Rule your mind or it will rule you." To rule your mind does not mean to suppress every feeling. It means to feel everything without becoming enslaved by any of it. I recall meeting a woman named Ellen, who had spent 40 years of marriage walking on eggshells, reacting to every small slight as though it were proof she had failed. In her 60s, she began to learn the practice of conscious breathing. At first she doubted it could matter. After all, how could the simple act of pausing before she spoke change the patterns of a lifetime? But one day, in the middle of an argument that would have once left her in tears, she placed her hand on her belly and inhaled deeply. In that breath, she asked herself a question that felt like a revelation. Is this worth my peace? To her surprise, the answer was no. She did not need to defend her intentions or prove her goodness. She simply needed to stand in her own clarity. From then on, Ellen described her reactions as if they were waves she could watch from the shore rather than drown in. Her husband, bewildered at first by this new calm, slowly began to meet her with more respect, not because she had demanded it, but because she was no longer handing over her serenity like an offering on the altar of his approval. I wonder, in your own life, how many times have you abandoned your calm because someone else could not find theirs? How often have you believed that your worth required explanation, justification, or apology? What if the next time you felt the familiar pull of urgency, you remembered Lady Visakha's lotus rising above, untainted, holding its quiet beauty, regardless of who stands in judgment? Emotional sovereignty does not come in a single moment of insight. It is a practice, a promise you make to yourself each day, to choose presence over reaction, to pause before you surrender your peace. And as you strengthen this choice, you will discover that your calm is not fragile at all. It is the most enduring gift you can offer to yourself and to everyone whose life touches yours. And so, with this understanding in our hearts, we step gently toward the next truth, the mirror effect, and how the world around us reflects the quiet we cultivate within. Part 4. The Mirror Effect. There is an ancient saying in the Dhammapada that has lingered in my memory since the first time I read it. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. Like a mirror, the world faithfully reflects back the hidden patterns we carry within. For many years, this idea puzzled me. How could my quiet intentions or secret doubts shape the way others treated me? But then I met a woman named Clara, whose story showed me, more vividly than any scripture, how our inner world becomes the lens through which all life is perceived. Clara was in her late 60s when she came to our small meditation group. She had raised 4 children almost single-handedly after losing her husband early. For decades, she had defined herself by her usefulness. Her identity was woven into the fabric of caretaking, every need met, every conflict softened, every burden carried. Yet, in the silence of her empty home, she began to notice a persistent ache she could not name. "I feel invisible," she confided one evening, her voice so low I had to lean in to hear it. "It doesn't matter how much I've done. People only see me when they need something." Over time, as she shared more of her story, it became clear that Clara's deep fear of not being enough had shaped her relationships in ways she hadn't realized. Because she believed love was something to be earned, she kept overextending herself, offering pieces of her energy like coins to buy affection. And each time, she felt emptier. She would say yes when her heart whispered no. She would smile when her spirit longed to rest. In every encounter, she was reflecting an unspoken message. "I will give you everything so you don't leave." And the world, like an unblinking mirror, returned that message. It's not that people were cruel, they simply responded to the frequency she emitted. When she began to experiment with pausing before she agreed to every request, when she practiced sitting in the discomfort of saying no, something remarkable happened. Those who only valued her for what she could offer began to drift away. It was painful at first, like pruning a vine tangled around her identity. But in that space, she noticed the quiet arrival of different relationships. People who respected her boundaries, who asked how she was without expecting her to fix their lives. This is the mirror effect. The outer world is never truly separate from our beliefs. When we carry unhealed grief, it colors every interaction, often attracting those who will reinforce our sorrow. When we harbor unspoken shame, we find ourselves in situations where that shame is triggered again and again. But when we begin to clear the fog inside, when we choose to see ourselves through a lens of compassion and worthiness, the mirror shifts. As the Buddha reminded his followers, what we think, we become. I remember how Clara's face softened over the months. Her shoulders no longer sagged beneath the weight of old obligations. She began to laugh more freely, her eyes brighter each time she shared a small victory, like saying no to a friend's unreasonable demand without apology. She told me once, I didn't realize that by changing how I see myself, I'd change how the world sees me too. Perhaps in your own life, there are reflections you keep encountering, patterns of feeling unseen, unappreciated, taken for granted. Have you considered that these patterns might be invitations to look more tenderly at the beliefs you hold inside? What if, instead of trying to fix everyone else, you gently turned your gaze inward and asked, "What am I projecting into this mirror?" This is not about blame, it is about awakening. When you see clearly, you are no longer bound by the old dance of overgiving and resentment. You can step out of the roles that have kept you small and inhabit the truth of your worth. And when you do, the mirror begins to reflect back relationships and experiences that honor your growth. As we prepare to explore the next part of this journey, let us carry this image with us, a clear, unclouded mirror that reflects the quiet beauty of a woman who knows herself. From this clarity comes the courage to withdraw when necessary, to step back not in anger, but in devotion to your own peace. And so we turn now to the art of strategic withdrawal and the freedom it can bring. Part 5. The strategy of withdrawal. There is a kind of wisdom that ripens only when we have lived long enough to know the cost of staying too long in places that drain our spirit. It is the wisdom of stepping back without resentment, of allowing distance to reveal truths that words never could. In the Buddhist tradition, this is sometimes called noble silence, and it is not merely the absence of speaking. It is the conscious choice to refrain from pouring energy into what no longer nourishes us. I once heard a story about a woman named Mara who lived many centuries ago in a monastery on the edge of a dense bamboo forest. She was known for her compassion, so much so that people would travel from distant villages to seek her counsel. For years, Mara believed that her purpose was to answer every cry for help. She sat for hours listening to endless complaints, mediating disputes, offering herself as a well from which anyone could drink. But as the seasons passed, she felt herself growing brittle. Her body weakened, her mind grew restless, her spirit no longer felt clear. One evening, she sat alone by the lotus pond, her reflection wavering in the moonlit water. She whispered into the night, "Have I given so much that there is nothing left?" As if in answer, her old teacher appeared behind her. He did not scold her or offer advice. Instead, he recited a single verse the Buddha had spoken long ago. "If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete." Those words settled over her like a soft blanket. For the first time, she understood that her endless giving was not entirely selfless. Beneath it lay the quiet fear that if she did not remain available, she would cease to matter. That evening, she made a vow. She would no longer abandon herself to prove her worth. And so, the next day, she began the delicate practice of strategic withdrawal. She closed her door to the endless stream of visitors and took time to nourish her own body and mind. She spent hours in meditation, tending her garden, listening to the bamboo sway in the wind. Many were bewildered by her absence. Some grew angry, but Mara did not return to them out of guilt. She returned only when her spirit was replenished and her presence was once again an offering rather than an obligation. In time, people noticed a change in her. When she did speak, her words carried a clarity they never had before. When she listened, she was fully present. Her absence had not diminished her, it had strengthened her. The boundary she created was not a wall to keep others out. It was a sanctuary where her own soul could rest. I have seen this same story unfold in modern lives, in women who reach a point where they can no longer tolerate the relentless tug-of-war between their longing to be kind and their need to be whole. One woman I met, let's call her Diane, spent decades in an on-and-off relationship with a man who took her love for granted. She believed that if she just explained herself better, If she just forgave a little more, he would finally see her value. But no amount of explaining changed the pattern, and so, in her 70s, Diane did something she had never done before. She stopped explaining. She stopped returning calls. She stopped defending her heart. Instead, she chose silence. At first, it felt like a small death, but gradually, her quiet became a garden where something new could grow, self-respect. In her absence, she discovered the simple joy of her own company. She began to understand that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to walk away, not in anger, but in self-trust. I wonder, where in your own life might you be staying out of habit rather than choice? Where have you convinced yourself that endurance is virtue, when in truth, it is fear? The Buddha often reminded his followers that attachment to what no longer serves is the root of suffering. When you allow yourself the space to step back, you invite clarity to enter. You discover who will meet you where you are, and who will fall away when you stop feeding old dynamics. Strategic withdrawal is not abandonment. It is a return to your own center, where your worth is not measured by how much you sacrifice. And in that return, something remarkable happens. You begin to recognize your time, your energy, and your peace as sacred. You no longer offer them lightly. You no longer confuse giving with proving. So let us carry this quiet understanding into the next part of our reflection. How steady presence, born from the courage to withdraw, becomes the most compelling force in any room. Part 6. Steady presence. There is something indescribably beautiful about a woman whose presence does not demand attention, but quietly holds it. Her calm is not an act. Her strength is not performed. It is simply who she has become. Through years of meeting herself honestly and learning to stand in her own truth without apology. In the old stories of the Buddhist nuns, there is one tale that always lingers with me, perhaps because it speaks to this very essence. It tells of Bada Kapilani, a woman who in her youth was known for her extraordinary beauty and intelligence. Many men sought her hand, dazzled by her grace. But Bada sensed that outward admiration was no measure of real connection, and so she chose a different path. After her marriage, she and her husband realized they shared the same longing to live a life of spiritual purpose. And so, with mutual respect, they parted ways to enter separate monastic communities. Over the years, Bada became renowned not for her beauty, but for the way she moved through the world, unhurried, centered, serene. It was said that when she entered the meditation hall, even the most restless novices would fall silent, simply because her presence reminded them of something they longed for within themselves. She never raised her voice to be heard. She never forced her views upon others. Yet people described feeling transformed by being near her, a living testament to the Buddha's words, "One who conquers himself is greater than another who conquers 1,000 men in battle." Perhaps you too have noticed this quality in someone, a neighbor who speaks little but radiates kindness, or a teacher whose steady gaze makes you feel safe to be exactly as you are. That kind of presence cannot be faked. It is the natural flowering of a life tended with honesty and care, and it is a presence available to each of us, regardless of age or circumstance. I once met a woman named Ruth, in her early 70s, who embodied this quiet power. For decades she had believed she needed to be agreeable to be loved. She said yes to everything, helping her grown children at all hours, volunteering beyond her strength, entertaining guests when all she wanted was a day of rest. Her voice had become so soft with self-sacrifice that even she could barely hear it anymore. But then, after a health scare that left her bedridden for months, she began to see her life differently. Lying there in the quiet, She realized her worth had never depended on being endlessly available. She began to practice a small ritual each morning. She would sit upright, roll her shoulders back, place one hand over her heart, and say aloud, "I am enough." At first it felt awkward, even foolish, but slowly this simple affirmation began to change her posture, her breathing, the way she entered a room. Her children noticed that she no longer leapt up to rescue everyone. Friends remarked on her calm, and Ruth discovered that her presence alone, steady, warm, self-respecting, was more powerful than all the years she had spent trying to prove herself. Have you ever wondered what might happen if you stopped trying to convince others of your value? What if you allowed your very way of being, how you sit, how you breathe, how you listen, to speak for you? When your internal world is aligned, your body becomes an instrument of truth. Your voice softens yet gains weight. Your gaze grows clear, unburdened by pretense. You no longer rush to fill every silence, because you have come to trust that your presence is enough. In Buddhist practice, this is sometimes called embodied stillness. It does not mean you never speak or act. Rather, it means that every word and gesture arises from a place of clarity, rather than reactivity. You are not trying to impress or placate. You are simply inhabiting yourself fully, and when you do, others sense it, often without knowing why they feel drawn to you, or why your calm makes them want to lay down their own defenses. I believe that as we grow older, we are offered a precious invitation to become living examples of what it looks like to be whole. Not perfect, but whole. To model for those around us, our children, our friends, even strangers, that there is another way to move through the world. A way that does not rely on performance or noise, but on quiet alignment with our truest values. So I wonder, as you listen to these reflections, can you feel the stirrings of that steady presence within yourself? What might shift if you began to trust it? If you allowed it to guide you more than the old habits of proving or pleasing? As you ponder these questions, let them rest in your heart like seeds, for in time, with patience and attention, they will grow into the flowering of a life rooted in peace. And from this fertile ground of self-respect and embodied stillness, we prepare to bring together all these insights in a closing reflection, a gentle invitation to honor the path you walk and the quiet power you carry. And so we arrive here, in this quiet place, where all the stories we have shared gently come to rest. Perhaps as you listened, you felt something tender stirring in you, a soft recognition of the woman you have always been beneath all the noise, beneath the endless giving and the old habits of proving. Maybe there was a moment when you sensed the stillness waiting patiently within, like a hidden garden you forgot you planted long ago. If today's reflection touched a part of you that is tired of performing, tired of carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations, I hope you will consider this. You do not have to earn your place in this life by diminishing yourself. You do not have to explain your worth to those unwilling to see it. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to breathe. You are allowed to become whole. Not because anyone grants you permission, but because you have always deserved it. As the Buddha once said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. When you honor that truth, when you reclaim your energy and your presence, the world around you begins to rearrange itself in ways you could never force. The chaos quiets. The people meant for you remain. The love that is real recognizes you without needing to be convinced. If there is one offering I hope you carry with you from these words, it is this: your stillness is not empty. It is alive. It is sacred. It is a force that speaks louder than any argument ever could. May you walk gently through the days ahead, knowing that you are enough exactly as you are. And may your quiet become the lantern that lights the path home, to yourself, to your own unwavering peace, to the freedom that was waiting inside you all along.